Five.
Hello, everyone.
All right,
Thank
everybody,
you.
we're going to get started on the penultimate session very soon. So if we can all take a seat, maybe just a few more minutes, and then we can get started. Dr. Israni,
Got it.
can you hear us okay?
I can hear you fine. Thank you. Can you
Yep.
hear me now?
Oh, I think you're still on mute. Can we check any sound?
I am not on mute.
Oh, perfect. Now we got you.
You got me.
We got
Okay, I'm going to try.
All right.
I'm going to try to go full screen mode again.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to get started on the second to last session of the day, and it's my pleasure to introduce Sharat Ishrani. He's the NIH scholar, data scholar at UCSF and the CTO of the Bakar Institute, and has really been a leader in data science, medicine, public health, trying to make data science accessible to your average citizen. And he's going to be talking about his work on the NIH NCATS biomedical data translator. So thank you very much for joining us. Take it away.
A quick check. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank the Healthcare Life Science Symposium organizers for allowing me to be here. I also regret that I couldn't be there physically. Well, I'm a long term technologist, but I've spent 10 years now in the world of medicine. It's been outstanding. And even as the possibilities continue to explode, as you can all watch them unfold, it's been a really rewarding thing. I want to, at the outset, thank Tyler Beck, who is the NCATS program director, biomedical translator. He has been a great help for me to get here, but also he's been phenomenal for the translator itself. Tyler, if you're anywhere in the room, I hope there's a microphone near you because you're welcome to jump in anytime and keep me honest or answer questions right there. Also, I will disclose that I am, as was said already, I'm actually with UCSF, but here I put on, and also with UC Davis, but I put on my NIH hat for my presentation here. I was once part of one of the knowledge network, Spoke Knowledge Network, the UCSF one, which is a part of this translator. About 5 or 6 years ago, actually, we had organized a workshop at the behest of NSF and NIH in Bethesda. It was about open knowledge networks, what's the good of them, and so on and so forth. I'm going back to the origins a little bit of this story, and biomedicine was one of the key disciplines featured over there. There were four. Next thing you know, a year later, out of the president's office came this bulletin or this report from the interagency working group saying that this is important stuff. Now, going a step forward, what happened exactly 2 years ago was that a report came out from the National Security Commission saying artificial intelligence is a national priority now. I think it was presented to the Congress and things started to happen. Over there, they said there are 5 areas where it's really key to have AI be a priority. As you can maybe see on the top, it says healthcare. And if you look towards the left, you'll see science and look closely at it. That includes life sciences, including, in this case, expediting drug and vaccine discovery, as an example. Then, if you take a step further, you look at down the 750-page report, you'll find that open knowledge networks are a very fundamental component of AI in those five national areas of national importance to apply. And here we are, meanwhile, biomedical translator was on its way doing good things. What it does is essentially surfaces a whole bunch of data that's lying highly scattered everywhere, to in sort of a familiar format to you, the knowledge graph format. And over here you're seeing essentially just a hairball of a bunch of green drugs and a few diseases, which are those red triangles. They sort of look like that if you really looked at it visually. Um, the um, that what the translator does is it actually you can traverse any path. Over here we happen to have picked two source and object, and you've got tramadol as a source and you've got an object which is a particular form of pain. You can find relationships between them if you visually look at them, but of course visually is never good enough. you've got to compute a whole bunch, as we'll be showing in a bit. And this just happens to show some so-called one-hop connections. Of course, there are many intermediate type nodes that you do end up finding the need for in these drug discovery types of queries. And you'll see them unfold as we go along. Now, the problem with human biology data, or the human health and human healthcare and life science data, especially life sciences, it is really, really huge and all over the place. These are just some of the sources that were brought into the biomedical translator. As an example, you can see, I mean, if you look hard enough here and there, there's drug bank right on top, which has all sorts of drug interactions and chemical structures and targets and mechanisms that it sort of elaborates on. You've got CTD to its right, which is the clinical trials database. You, just as it sounds, down there somewhere you'll see ClinVar at the bottom left, and that is the relationship between variants in your gene and clinical outcomes or clinical phenotypes. The big one is on the top left, which is PubMed, essentially the entire corpus of um, publications related in healthcare and life sciences, which has been sort of scarfed up by various forms of NLP. These are only some of the sources, and this has been a big problem. Just drug bank alone, or any, not drug bank necessarily, any of these could be of the order of 10 to the 8 or 10 to the 9, key value pairs or relationships that you can find. It's enormous, and they're not obviously reconciled against each other in terms of sort of the link points and so on. And so just getting to a working set of knowledge graphs out of all these, resolving the differences between them, has been a major step that translator has performed over the last couple 3 years. Now, the architecture looks a little bit like this. You've got public databases at the bottom, and you've got those at least 100 that are being scarfed up right now, on which you've got knowledge providers. Knowledge providers, their job, is to go to those various public databases and sort of bring them together in a way that makes more sense. As a knowledge provider, you have one or the other discipline. It could be genomics, it could be clinical, molecular, all of the, and many, many more. But yours is to find where these different public databases are and reconcile them against each other, and make them clean. On top of that, there's a set of reasoning agents, each of which are driven by key questions, which we'll see emerge in a minute. And in the near term, these key questions are essentially drug discovery oriented. Each reasoning agent follows its own logic or its own mechanisms and intelligence, whatever it wants to do. All of them are brought together on top by a relay agent, basically a relay system, whose job is to essentially serve as a relay, but act, if you wish, as a federator or sort of a scatter gather, however you want to look at it, but essentially manage the queries. And in fact, I already spoke to some of this, but here you see what the genomic, three different types of knowledge providers. You can see them represented over there. At the relay system level, it also serves a UI that's emerging now, which is making it far easier to essentially query this translator. Now, here's a sense of size. We don't actually sit there counting nodes and relationships and edges, but we get a sense of what's going on over there. We estimate there are at least 100 million nodes of 62 different types. You'll see the types in a moment. And at least 300 million relationships of about 77 types. There are 14 funded teams, 150 in the consortium, funded individuals, and then there's a small intramural and developer and management team. The developer team for the intramural one has created the automated the relay system, the structure that I showed right before this. That's about the size of it. Although if I was wrong by a factor of 50%, I wouldn't be surprised. Now, describing biological relationships is really hard. It makes for very challenging syntax. These are the entities. You've got chemical entities, biological entities, and the subtrees therein. And then you've got a whole bunch of other supporting sorts of entities, administrative attributes, and so on. You also, when you try to explain the syntax, you have all these predicates, and these are some of the predicates that are in front of you. A big one is, right on top is effects. Effects is not at the leaf node level. Effects is in the middle somewhere. There's a subtree below it. There is associated with. That's a big one. Sort of. Maybe you can't see my cursor, but sort of a quarter of the way down the top, which has got quite a large subtree below it. You got causes, treats. Associated with is a very hardworking predicate, by the way. And then these predicates it looks like a little bit like this when you start to try to explain in English the subject and everything about the subject. The object, which in this case is CDKN2A, that's particular gene, and its form or variant, mutant form, object aspect methylation, etc. And then the predicate that's involved, in this case effects, gets to be pretty elaborate. And here's just a representative of when you're trying to, this is just the enum of the sort of chemical entity or gene product aspect. As you can see, the activities could be folding, mutation rate, splicing, mutating, I guess, splicing, stability, all that. Molecular modifications start with the A's at acylation, acylation, alkylation, and so on. And it goes on for about 17 different molecular modifications. So by the time you really try to explain what's going on biologically, it gets to be mind boggling. And yet you have to do that in order to essentially compute. Trying to advance. Now the user interface is under construction, and over here you see the 5 initial canonical queries that are given. What drugs may treat a disease, or what chemical / drug upregulates or downregulates typically a gene protein, or vice versa. And then when you do that, it gives you a little bit of autocomplete help. In this case, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It gives you all these other alternatives in the sort of named entity called disease, and you can pick one and go for it. What chemical downregulates the FLT3 gene mutation, and as you can see, there's not just human but other organisms as well, all of which is important to a biomedical knowledge network for research. Now, the problem is that with big data come big results. I want to dwell a moment on this slide and tell you exactly this and the next 1 or 2 slides, and then I'm kind of done. A typical researcher way of thinking to discover a drug is to say what chemical or drug, in yellow, will treat rheumatoid arthritis. That's the one on the right in red. But they know what the pathway that really is, they think pathway first towards the end. What do they know about rheumatoid arthritis? They know, for example, MyD88 is sort of an inflammation causing pathway, biological process. So they say, look, tell me what chemicals or drugs up or down regulate genes that have an effect on the pathways through the gene-protein interaction, protein-protein interactions and pathways onto rheumatoid arthritis. And then now that I know that much, that pathway is very interesting. Are there any approved drugs that deal with that pathway also? In this case, imicumod, which is used for a particular form of skin cancer, actually, keratosis. And so if you look at that, what happens, you do a query for chemical drug for rheumatoid arthritis, you may find there are 20 pathways, 30 genes per pathway, 30 chemical entities per gene, or you may have 10 approved drugs. This results in easily 18,000 combinations to evaluate. And I could be wrong by a factor of 4 over easily. You could easily end up with 500,000 even combinations by the time you go through the knowledge network and all the data it's given you. So the problem becomes, how do you actually order the results and make them more relevant, sort of in sort of like search engines do? And that's just to evaluate them. Then you evaluate those each of those results. Well, what we do is we consulted with some research experts, subject matter experts, and we said, what are the things that cause you to think about how to look at a particular possibility, a drug target? And over here, you say, you see that what the question again is, what drug may treat disease X? And the challenge is that you've got all these diverse variables of various levels of utility, I call them, which you'll see in a moment what they are. And you're trying to make them independent of each other and yet come up with sort of a function that gives you a sort of a result score for a particular result. Say imicomod treats that, uh, treats whatever, treats even rheumatoid arthritis. Okay, now what we do is we take the different reasoning agents, and remember they're semi black boxes to us. We take the different reasoning agents and come up with a function to resolve them firstly. And then we take other things that have so far been declared as interesting by the SMEs, which include clinical evidence. Do you have any clinical evidence for this? Drug stage, which really should be clinical trial stage, but for drugs. Nevertheless, that's what we mean. And then an all important novelty factor. Now, there's some function that combines all these into a result score. And I'm going to sort of jump to the end because, of course, we don't have a lot of time. Um, these are on the right. You can see the PIs who are leading the thinking around this result scoring. The G factor, once again, the G factor was the one which was used by the six different reasoning agents. Is used. They use some dimensionality reduction to inform. What are the weights we should give these different reasoning agents depending on the query type. And one of the issues we run into pretty soon is that the results are pretty sparse. But we're finding mechanisms to increase the result density by sort of essentially getting similar edges, similar results to be the same for the purposes of scoring. And that's one thing. One thing we're doing in various forms of dimension reduction. Then looking at the rest of the function, once again, the rest, actually, I don't need to go back. The rest of the function right on top, which combines the agent scores G function with the other three factors. We are looking at them pretty carefully. Looking right at the bottom, you'll see we're considering some fuzzy logic approaches. And for those that are familiar, dysgenet, which is disease gene network, has some utility based scoring based on what SMEs like to see. I argue that the fuzzy logic we're using resembles that. As an example, clinical evidence is the factor called clinical evidence is a weighted odds ratio of association strengths between entities with drug and disease. If there's clinical evidence, how strong is the evidence? How strong is the association? And then drug stage or clinical test trial stage is discrete, 1 through 4, as we kind of all know. Novelty factor has got a whole bunch of very interesting components. There's the publication count, the publication recency, a sort of a cross product between the two, inferred relationships other than just the direct relations stated by, say, drug bank or some molecular source. Is the drug being used off label? Is there any lack of clinical evidence? And we're sort of teasing through all these things to see how, what importance the subject matter experts give these different components. And by the way, what are the interplays between them, which I could describe, except I want to save some time for comments and questions. And so when you go forward, we look at, for example, this is what a result score may look like. It may look like the sort of eigenfactors that came out of the G function resulted in two agents getting, these weightages 0.86 and 0.57. But the other agents might not be very important because they all follow different logic to this drug treats disease type query. And let's just say based on what the result came back with, the agent scores are 42 and 70 and so on and so forth. The clinical association strength, like I said, is the association strength. It may be 30 based on some SME utility scale, and putting that number in, you may end up saying, okay, this result, that drug which I can barely pronounce, treats AML with a score of 99.82. And we've got, as I mentioned, for hundreds or thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of such results per query. And in the end, it starts, and this is a very, very, very early version of the UI. Then the end, this is what it looks like. It gives you a direct link. This our drug treats AML, but also you'll soon be seeing, if you go below this, actually a bunch of multi-hop paths as well. And then on the left, you've got this faceted search where you can start to. This is what the experts like. They like to group things up, group things down. They like to eliminate, known drugs, etc. Okay, last couple of slides. What are some key system challenges? As I've been implying all along, there's little use to giving a researcher 10,000 results. What are they going to do with them? And so, what are the strategies for us to intelligently surface the top 20, shall we say? You of course can think this. You can be forgiven for thinking this looks a little bit like web search, and it does. But the difference is the researchers have a whole different mindset on the accuracy and explainability of what you're showing. Anyway, so that's a challenge. Performance, when you've got a system like that created by 14 different entities around the country, you can imagine the whole thing is never optimally architected, and certainly not for performance at the first go, although there's a long road ahead, and I think the performance is getting better and better already. But that's an issue to always watch for. And then as we take on other questions, like other questions than what drug treats disease, you including gene regulation, then you have to adapt the F function as well. For example, genes have 4 different levels of novelty in their target, and we've got to bring that in: T dark, T clin, and so on. I want to end with an inspiring story about David Feigenbaum. Um, David Feigenbaum was a medical student when he found out. In effect, it didn't happen in one quick clinical visit. Let me tell you, he found out that he had what's known as an idiopathic multicentric Castleman's disease. And Castleman's disease is the short form for it, and it's a very rare disease. Of course, it was killing him. It was killing him, and there was no drug for it. But what he did, he decided, look, I am qualified enough to do my own research. And he found through his research using mechanisms like the translator, and he's been to the translator and he's been an inspiration for the translator. um, he found out that his mTOR signaling was being sort of down regulated. That wasn't a good thing. So he was on a quest to discover an mTOR inhibitor. Now, mTOR inhibitor, when you have such a rare disease and you have so much data, you can never assume that somebody has studied the condition carefully enough to be able to come to a solution. But he did. To cut the long story short, today he's a faculty member in Penn Medicine, and he wrote this book called Chasing My Cure. By his own account, he has lived about 112 months past when he was supposed to, which is nearly 10 years. You think about it. It goes to show how one individual can make such a huge difference, and our goal with the translator is to enable many such individuals. Thank you. Any questions, comments, feedback? We welcome it.
So I have Tyler sitting right next to me, so I'm going to give you the first opportunity to see any follow-on.
Sure. I mean, Sharat did a great job of explaining the system. I'm Tyler Beck. I am the program director for the Biomedical Data Translator at NCATS. I think the only other thing I would say is that we've been able to build this system and do plan to have a public release of it by the end of this year. We've built the system using less than $50 million worth of funding. It has been NCATS has a small budget comparatively to other NIH institutes, and we've used that budget to the best of our ability in this program. And we've created a really interesting and very inspiring community of researchers on this program, which I'm happy to talk more about to any of you. But I want to give Sharat the full question and answer here. So thank you.
Thank you, Tyler.
Tyler, by all means, jump into the Q&A as well, and thank you for surfacing. There's a question in the chat. How does the novelty factor not fall into the trap of irrelevance? Because, as I understand, it considers the lack of evidence as a measurement of novelty, but it is not possible to be completely irrelevant, uncertain relations. Slightly parsing that how I can, the lack of evidence is not the only measure of novelty. It means that if something is being indicated as it could work, but is not given, then by definition, that's a one signal of novelty. Besides, there are others. It is not possible to be completely irrelevant / uncertain relation. Yes,
Sure. Can
yeah,
I add to that just a little bit? Sorry, this is Tyler. So the novelty factor comes into play really importantly when we talk about rare disease, because NCATS does focus pretty heavily on rare diseases, and in a lot of cases, those patients who have a very rare disorder have been treated with everything under the sun that their physicians can think of. And what that means is that if you're looking to find new treatments for a rare disease, you want to skip past all the things that have been tried already. And so that's sort of where that novelty factor comes into play. We imagine that we expect that some of our researchers will want to say, show me only novel results, not things that have been approved for similar diseases, things like that. So that's where that comes in, and it will be important for the overall score, but will be probably more important for this sort of faceted search aspect.
perfect.
So I see there's one more online question. Do we want to do that one first, and then we'll hand it over to Deb?
Yes, sure. Are there applications of this system to reduce mental health disparities? The system could very well be ready now for someone to go query it for. I mean, all the disease conditions are essentially in there. Has anyone done this? I don't know, actually. Um, but it'd be worth a try to go in and see what it shows.
Great talk. This is Deborah McInnes. I wonder, and that story about Feigenbaum was like really inspirational, but I wonder what it takes for somebody who's not quite as well trained, like isn't a doctor, to be able to use this to help either themselves or their loved one, potentially in collaboration with the doctor. But what kind of steps does it take for broader usage of this?
Fantastic question. One that dogs us every day in our lives as sort of systems creators. I'm going to let Tyler end what I say with the introduction that actually even the subject matter experts said, I don't want to investigate this by myself. I want someone next to me who can help me navigate the system. And I don't think they'll be able to ask the questions I'm asking. After all, I'm the researcher. So they see this sort of as a tuple or three tuple or something like that. Right now, I'm myself helping someone who's been found with a rare disease, who is a doctor himself, to discover what could be some solutions for him. I'm able to easily navigate it, but I don't know what he's asking me. That's sort of a half answer. Tyler, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would say is that we, as I said, we expect to do a public release of this toward the end of the year. There will be a very clear indication when we release that this is a tool that's being built for researchers, not for clinical decision support, because we don't want, a physician to go and use biomedical data translator to find a potential treatment and just immediately say, okay, let's try it. We don't want that. We want this to be used in a research fashion. So clinical researchers may find it very valuable, but we don't, and we definitely don't want the general public to start using this and say, okay, I'm going to treat myself with this because NIH says to. That would be terrible. And so we will make it very clear that this is a research tool, and it will always be meant to be a research tool. Now, that doesn't mean that systems like this, or even this system eventually, could be adapted more clinically. But for now, we really want to focus this on the fact that it is meant for researchers.
Okay, Eric, you can have the last question.
Thank you. Wonderful talk. Sorry. Wonderful talk. One thing that I had seen that worked very efficiently is that if you provide a lot of relevant, succinct information to an area like genomics and cancer, to a virtual tumor board, you have a lot of the minds there with all different backgrounds, and then they can hash through the evidence and the literature and really inform themselves and come up with good prospects of what could be tried. Have you thought about using Translator for virtual tumor boards or virtual any other kind of clinical groups?
Sharat, is it okay if I answer that one? So
Please.
this is actually happening every day at the Precision Medicine Institute at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. They see a lot of rare disease patients and patients who have been treated with, again, everything that could be tried. And they're using, they're using both Translator and LLMs now in concert to try to find new potential treatments for patients there at the Precision Medicine Institute. Dr. Matt Might is our sort of star there. He's been using Translator for since we started the early phases of it, and they have some really amazing stories of treating patients with seemingly innocuous, I wouldn't even call them drugs, just different things that are household agents. We have one case where a young woman was had cyclic vomiting syndrome, and they used translator tools to try to find that if she would sniff an alcohol-soaked Q-tip, it would stop her nausea. And this young woman had been throwing up every day of her life for 19 years, and suddenly had no more nausea after that when she would just take a little baggie out and sniff some isopropyl alcohol. It was amazing. Stories like that are what we are hoping to continue building with Translator.
Thank you, Tyler.
Right.
Thank you,
Tyler.
everyone.
Thank you, Sharat. Okay. So our next speaker is Steve Hamby. Steve's an experienced teacher, software developer, professional who's incubated multiple and matured multiple companies in our space. Currently, he's representing some work from Vitality TechNet. And the really interesting approach here is, let's take for granted a little bit that knowledge graphs are making it into our business. And let's think about some of the major ontologies that are coming into our space, IDMPO, things like the allotrope foundational ontologies. What does this then mean for workers in this space? And how do we think about retraining those workers? So, Steve.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. Great introduction. So this is one of those that I probably will start by just kind of giving you my background. I'm not from this sector. Life sciences is something I haven't really worked much in my career. And the reason I say this is because for me, this was a unicorn. I talked to someone else today, and he said, well, actually, this is something that goes on regularly in healthcare. So it made me think, well, hey, maybe this is just my unicorn is not truly a unicorn. But I'm going to go ahead and present this, and hopefully it still provides some value, even if it's not, even if it's something that you're familiar with already. So just discussion points here. We'll just kind of flip through these. Hopefully this is something that's what you're expecting. Carl, if you're still in here, you are. I didn't take your slides and quickly run out feverishly build this one. Just happens we're presenting the same slide. Mine just flipped over on the horizontal instead of vertical. But this is basically one of the challenges. And, we talk about lots of things that we can do with semantic technologies. I think sometimes, is it profitable or is it an ROI is one of the things that we have to come back to. So, the 10 and a half years, 2.9 billion if you go through. I think your 2.6 is up too. My 2.9 goes through regulatory. But it's all coming from the same folks. These stats are accurate. The great thing about this, though, in 2021, 1/3 of the drugs that were in the top 20 of revenue producing were drugs produced in the last 2 years. Now, you could say, well, Steve, that includes COVID. Yep, it did. But I think even if you look at some before and even some after, you're seeing numbers up at the top. For that year, the top 20 produced $922.6 million per month in revenue. So if you think about what if we could just move the timeline forward 1 month? And so there's your ROI right there. Just simply 1 month cut off of this 10.5 year life cycle. or 10.5 years, that's your ROI. There's no software that you're going to implement that's going to be $922.6 million. So there's your ROI. So that's the idea that why pharmaceutical companies, or at least the one that I'm working with, which, by the way, I forget who it was who said they didn't get a chance to talk to their company. I actually talked to the one I'm representing. They said, no, you were definitely not mentioning our name at that conference. I said, yes, sir, and moved on. So, anyway, to be unnamed intentionally. But basically, this is data standards, and this is how they're being helped. This is FDA's data standards throughout the four phases here versus the 5 that I just showed, but you get the point. And so these are the data standards for reporting. And then how does that actually fit in? So I've got basically the idea of a representation of a ECTD filing, electronic common technical document filing. It's linked to a bunch of different ontologies. So maybe there's a piece that says this is the analysis that went on in this. Here's the product itself, the substance, the lineage of that substance, et cetera. And it's all kind of linked together, and it doesn't really form a true document, but it's kind of like this living document would be the idea. And so that's this company that I'm working for. This is our goal. This is their goal, I should say. I'm just helping implement it. So 2 years ago, I retired. I was working as an executive vice president of a semantic technology company, and I was also teaching grad school. And it was a little bit of work for me. And I just said, you know something, I'm going to go and retire and fish and golf more. So turtles became things that were on banks of rivers and not files that I was working with RDF. And a buddy of mine called and said, hey, I've got this opportunity, and would you be interested in coming in and doing some work for me? I said, definitely. So I go in immediately. This is going to be just teaching Semantic 101. I've done this a bunch of times in my life, not a big deal. Start talking to the company. What are you doing? I'm expecting them to not really say much. And they're like, well, we've got a few vocabularies. We're doing some work with allotrope. We've made an investment in Pasoya Alliance and the IDMPO, Identification of Medicinal Product Ontology. And so it's like, okay, well, you're for much further along than I thought you would be. But okay, so I can understand why you maybe want to understand more about the actual underlying and performance, and what does this axiom mean versus this axiom? Why you don't put those together? Things like that. So I start building the slides specific for them that I want to produce. It's going to be a one-day training, not a multi-day. Anyway, once I get into the shop, I begin to look around, and I notice that they've got a lot of work. This isn't just what they've told me on the phone is not the extent of what they've done. So I began asking, well, who's the ontologist that developed this? And the answer was nobody. We picked it up. And I'm talking to large molecule scientists, small molecule scientists, and I'm thinking, how did you do this? And so this was, for me, the thing that was coming back. By the way, I apologize. I did not give a slide. I'm looking down at my copyright statement. So this wasn't just Vitality TechNet. Also, Alyssa Kendall is involved in this. EDM Council lead ontologist, partner at Thematics. Deborah McGinnis is involved in this from RPI. And then Gabriel Aviles, the owner, and actually Gabriel and Beatrice Aviles, husband-wife combo that own Vitality TechNet. My apologies for not representing them properly up front. So anyway, that's actually what kind of led to this research. So this wasn't intentional. It was something that I started doing this work, and suddenly I said, okay, there's a unicorn for me. I've got scientists who suddenly are building ontologies. And let me step back a little bit. Allotrope does a great job for results, and if you think about that from assays, and those are my quality attributes are getting measured there that I want to track. So it does a good job of building those ontologies. I've also got equipment. I've got material. I've got lots of things that may not be modeled well. There's drug targets that are modeled well. Diseases are modeled well. There's a lot of things that maybe are not modeled well. Suddenly I'm seeing those types of ontologies, and not formal ontology, but more kind of a taxonomy. Think of it as the T-box in a knowledge model. They've developed some T-box, and that's about it. No heavy axioms. So it took me back to work that Jeff Pollack, and I think he's probably got the best work, in my opinion, of what's called information worker roles for semantic web applications. And he gives us 7 of them to look at. He misses out on some because he wrote this book, I think in 2007, if I remember correctly. And so it misses things like data scientist, data analyst. But he talks about business analysts. They're the catalyst for mission processes. Well, definitely I could look and see those types of people in this work. He talks about corporate librarians, taxonomists, ontologists, information architects, data stewards, and data administrators, okay? And you can kind of see there, looking at the slides, what they each do. And then on top of this, we've got this huge information worker shortage. So those are the people that need to implement these ontologies, vocabularies, et cetera. But we've got this huge shortage, and you can see some of the stats here. 58% consider hiring an information worker very or extremely challenging, et cetera. And then down at the bottom, you see some slides, and these are coming from different sources, by the way. You can see them sourced there. But at the bottom, it talks about training and upskilling staff is the primary method. 75% of companies from SaaS, I assume that's from a SaaS survey, that's where I got the source anyway, said that's how they actually did the work. And so this is what I'm seeing at this particular company. And this was experiential learning actually happening on the fly. And so Kolb gives us this definition, and I think it's probably one of the better ones out there: the process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience, okay? Knowledge results from the combinations of grasping and transforming that experience. And so what we were actually seeing here, as I kind of went through and talked to some of these large molecule scientists primarily, some small as well, is that they were looking at the allotrope ontology, knowing their domain experience in that, and really reverse engineering the process that ontology was developed. And they're looking through and saying, well, how did they form this? Well, how did they form that? And they're writing these things down and building this knowledge on the fly. And then taking that and saying, well, now let me take it to equipment and figure out when we see terms come across and there's one spectrometry tool does it one way and another one names it something else, how do we handle this? And trying to take that information that they had reverse engineered and figure it out. And they did a great job. I will tell you, I was quite impressed to see some of the things. Now, granted, they didn't get to the level of deep level axioms and whatnot in ontology or in OWL, but they did a great job. And so experiential learning, as we just see here, is one method that organizations can use to fill it. And so then that kind of led, as I mentioned, to this is a very small study. Again, it wasn't intended to be a study. It was simply 6 scientists that I was observing at this major US-based pharmaceutical company. They were doing things such as managing master data, developing taxonomies, understanding how those taxonomies link together, applying those taxonomies for reuse. So I want to take it from lab 1 to lab 2. And specifically, when I take this equipment, I'm actually building the reports that are required to say everything about that, maybe when it was last calibrated, things of that nature. And then applying data science to that data using the ontology. And finally, governing those taxonomies. And that was the one that probably the first few I could get a little bit, the governing. They were actually building their own governance models on the fly. That one kind of got me. I was like, well, I don't even do a good job sometimes of governing my own ontologies and building a great model. I think a lot of ontologists tend to leave that one off toward the end. And so to do this, here's some of the methods that we use. We simply mine their emails, support requests, messages, because this went on for a year before I even came into as a consultant here. So I went back and tried to see, well, what were they doing? What were the support requests that were coming through that were requiring them to look at things? And then I went through and looked at their backgrounds. None of them had formal educations in anything that were knowledge. They're all literally either chemist, biomedical, or something in that background. We looked at their, where we had gaps, we just simply used informal interviews. We didn't want them to feel like they were being interviewed at any time. So it was simple, casual question like, hey, how did you know to do this? That kind of stuff. And again, we weren't really performing any research. We were trying to, I shouldn't say it that way. We weren't planning on having anything that we would publish. This just became a better understanding how to help them build this. And then from that, we developed scientist profiles. I'll share those in just a second. And then we did literature review as well, just simply because we wanted to see what else was out there. Had anyone else written to this? What things could we support or refute based on the observations we were seeing? And so before I go any further, the work that they were doing, number one, automating lab reporting was quite valuable for them. Being able to take scientists away from having to build handwritten reports, things like that, and automating those reports. And so what does this mean? From one lab, we get a report out. There's a form, or not form. There's I guess we can call them forms that they fill out. Excuse me, and basically this was giving them the ability to now take those and automate them. Build as soon as the data came off the equipment, we would basically pull that, put it in the right terms, and now they would have another system where that was being pulled from. Okay. Discovering best practices across the organization as they rolled out the semantics. It was interesting. I think someone mentioned earlier that a lot of the oh goodness, I'm having my brain is froze up on what the right term is, but the folks that are funding it are actually looking at it from a target perspective or a therapeutic area. Excuse me. And a lot of times those folks don't talk together. Well, it's even worse when you get down to a lab who's doing the individual research and then R&D as far as they communicate what they communicate. So now suddenly you've got a large molecule scientist standing up saying, hey, I've got the answer for this set of, if you're doing spectrometry, I've got the terms for that. Talk to me. And now they work together. That was the interesting thing, is that as I got involved listening to phone calls between and having those discussions all around the terminology, but actually what was happening was it was the best practices. Oh, you're doing it this way? That's what the conversation led to. But it was because of this extra role, I'll call it, that this person took, this extra information worker role that led to that. And then as far as how this is going to improve the drug development process, it's much too early to kind of see that, but definitely that's something that is the goal of the company, and I'm sure we'll see it personally. The other thing that's great is many years I've been doing this type of work. The one thing that I always found was powerful is when you can get a customer who says, oh, I love this, I want more of it. And in this case, just simply the automated lab reporting, this went from being kind of, I think someone said it today and I forget now, I wish I wrote down names as I went through, and my notes are sitting over there so I don't have it, but they said a mandate is one of those things that immediately turn it off. I think, was it John? I think it was you, but a mandate is something that turns someone off immediately. And but in this particular case, suddenly scientists are coming and saying, please, ontology, well, they don't use that, please standardify this because we hear what you've done for all the other labs. And so you've got this demand signal that's happening to the point that now they don't have enough. These 6 scientists can't handle the load. And so, there's now contractors helping, and they're trying to, part of the reason for wanting to do this is how do we actually take a pedagogical background and apply it to build out personas to actually instantiate this as something that's rooted, not a grassroots effort, but actually rooted in something that's supported. So that's another reason for wanting to present this research. So anyway, here's my scientist information worker profiles. And I'm going to fly through them probably just because I'm looking at time, 10 minutes left. You'll see most of these are all large molecule. One person crosses large and small, but in this company, they keep them pretty separate. So this person is carrying a large molecule methods development role. They're serving in business analyst, taxonomist, and business analyst. I think we could all understand. It's just going to be someone who works in the mission field and is working with IT on the, and he already serves that role in this particular case because he supports well, I won't mention the product name, but anyway, he supports a product that actually does integration across the enterprise and labs specifically. And he serves as a taxonomist in that he's done most of the work in developing the ontologies. An information architect, he understands how that information actually blueprints across the organization, which is, again, information architect is actually a very, requires a lot of skill. And so no IT background. And then he also serves as a data steward. He's literally the person when someone comes in and says, I want to call it this. No, you can't call it that because we've got a term called XYZ, and that is, it's not a sequence number, it's a interval number or whatever. And there's a reason that one's defined one way and the other. Again, very interesting type of a role for a lab scientist to take. I'm going to jump down to percentage time work. This person probably spends a little more time, 50%. Understands the ontology as a resource. And I think this is what's valuable here. Simply knows that there are industry ontologies. I want to pull from those industry ontologies and apply that as much as I can in the in whatever I'm trying to solve right now. And if there's nothing that's already formally defined, I'm going to take that process and build it out. Motivation, this particular person was a volunteer. This wasn't a mandated role. It wasn't, hey, I want you to accept this extra role. It was, there's a gap here, I'm going to fill it. And let's see, I think that's a very freely shares knowledge. And I don't know if all these things are going to work out the same if we took this to other companies. Scientist 2, jumping over, same role, functional, formal function. Different organization, or different part of the organization, I should say, but same function. Still in CMC, I should say it that way. All of these scientists are all chemical manufacturing controls side. None of them are in regulatory or anything like that, but or not in clinicals, et cetera. But anyway, information worker role in this case, simply taxonomist and business analyst. A little bit less, and this was actually an assigned. They wanted, once this grassroots effort started growing legs, suddenly they started assigning, we're going to give you, and you're going to go and now have to learn this. So suddenly this is now an assignment. Less time, but understands the need for consistent enterprise data, not necessarily understanding the ontologies, and not really out looking at the ontologies per se. The scientist one might actually go out to, and I'm just going to throw out some names just so hopefully it helps, a tool like Top Quadrant Vocabulary Management or Sentry or Calibra. Hopefully those terms, those product names make sense to you. They would actually go and use those types of terms to try to find things. Scientist 2 typically is not. They might rely on Scientist 1 more. Scientist 3 is actually integrating a data lake. This is, you're talking a chemist. This person is has an education in chemistry. They've actually been doing it though for 10 years. That's one thing to note. So they've been doing these types of roles for a longer period of time, but they're serving many roles there, 5 roles in all. And they're working with a major data lake and semantic tool provider, data fabric provider to actually build out a data lake. Try to see anything else about that one that I want to cover. Scientist 4, very similar to Scientist 2. In fact, we're going to kind of leave that one. This one is a chemist. It actually, they cross over. They're both large molecule and small molecule. That's the one that I was talking about earlier. They were developing taxonomies as well. And in that role, definer of terms. Trying to see if there's anything special else to bring up. Scientist 5, again, very similar, but only in large molecule. 6 is an interesting one. It's the person that I actually report to within the organization. And again, background is a science background, not education, or not, I'm sorry, not IT of any way. But he's been doing it for so long, almost 15 years. He was actually involved in allotrope early on, one of the people that was actively involved. So this one I think is kind of, I almost didn't include him anyway, because I was like, well, that may be unfair because he's got 15 years, was involved in allotrope development kind of as a guide. But nonetheless, I ended up including him because I will talk about personas in just a second, and he was primary person behind my visionary persona. Some great, beautiful stats. You got to do stats, but basically what I'm just saying this is I went through then and did some analysis, not me. The team went through, did some analysis and said, well, what are there any things that we could look at and say, hey, this makes a difference in this profile that would feed a persona. And by the way, persona, the concept of a persona here, if you're familiar with user experience, you've got user personas. If you're familiar with customer experience, there's customer personas. In education, so I teach graduate school software engineering at a private university in Georgia. And my personas are literally 3 types. Very, very cut and dried. I've got my professional, I got my person who's going straight from undergrad to graduate, et cetera. But when I retired, or supposedly retired, I decided to go teach software engineering or software development at a public university, a regional public on top. And my personas suddenly were like 15 or 20 or whatever. It was night and day different. And I'm not being an educational snob here. Please don't take it that way. But and so suddenly I found myself developing personas and trying to rely on it more. And the idea is, I can't properly teach unless I can understand my student. And so that's the reason we develop personas. So one of the things I did with this analysis was then to develop personas. And when I say I mean my team. Sorry. So this was the first suggested learner. It's the scientist, information worker, experiential learning persona. And the idea is this one's an introductory, experiential, and I feel like scientist 2, 4, and 5 fit into this one quite well. Those were very new. They were simply looking for more guidance. Their watering holes, or the place where they get their knowledge sources, were typically the existing ontology, and actually more relying on what we'll call the next one, which is my advanced. We're taught to name our personas so that we can actually talk to them and things like that, so we get to better understand them. So hopefully these things make sense. Here's my advanced experiential. Probably no more experience from a pharmaceutical perspective than the introductory. In fact, sometimes in this particular case, the person actually had less experience. But the difference here is that they're spending more time doing more research on existing ontologies. They're actually trying to reverse engineer those, and actually working pre-competitive collaboration with other companies. That's one thing I noticed about this person that was different. They were actually involved in things like IDMP, attending phone calls, things like that. And that term pre-competitive collaboration, I think, is something that's very neat to this environment, or this industry. And then we've got the integrator role. One thing I think that's neat about the integrator is they're that step that says, hey, we want to make sure that it's nice that you guys are doing it, that advanced person is covering, or the introductory is covering it from individual lab or some group of labs, but that integrator is responsible for making sure that everything aligns across the enterprise and feeding those knowledge sources there. Typically, you'll see some blend of classroom, research, and experiential learning, I would think, with this particular type of person. And then we've got the visionary, not just the visionary for how does semantics lay across the enterprise, but in this case, how do we actually embody experiential learning, and using those ontologies to help make the team smarter about how to actually develop ontologies. Okay, and leads to future research ideas, what to do next. Well, number one, we're going to continue to monitor the success of the semantic technology at this particular company. I'd like to work with other folks to, if these scientist information worker concepts make sense, I would like to work with other companies to see if this is something that we could grow, if it makes sense anyway. And then I think it needs to be, this lacks statistic power. There's an irrelevant sample size. So I would like to see something that's more statistically powerful. And then again, looking for research partners. References if you want to follow up on anything that I did in my research. Questions?
Thank you, Steve. Really welcome addition to this conference. I think getting a chance to step back and look at how we behave and how we can behave better, I think is really valuable. So thank you for that.
Okay, thanks.
Questions?
Really interesting talk. I've definitely observed each of these different personas that you just showed as part of our consortium within the translator we talked about. The drug discovery aspect is something that is really important, and really I'm wondering if you have some insight on not just sort of the drug discovery pathway and the personas there, but the sort of the earlier research, the basic science research as well that leads to that. Have you looked at personas that fit within that profile as well, or is it really, are you totally focused on the development pathway, data worker?
Yeah, in this particular case, I was focused purely on drug development. Again, this was a come in, do some training on semantics, and then it led to trying to uncover how did you get so far with no semantic training whatsoever. That said, I think the idea of taking this one step back would be smart, and probably should have added it to my what to do next slide. Thank you. Appreciate that.
So in the tech world, we have um, nerds that want to take jobs because they want to learn certain languages that are, up and trendy and cool and whatnot. Do you see something similar going on? So in other words, do you sense that there's an argument to be made that people should take on these information scientist roles because in the future, this is where their future jobs lie?
Yeah, I think the advanced experiential learner caught that pretty quickly. I think that was the reason that this particular person, 6 years of experience, I think he had, jumped in and said, "Hey, I see this as being a way to project my career," and he indeed has. And so I think that, yeah, you probably have that type of motivation there as well, and that I think something to feed. I think in this particular case, maybe there's more things they could have done for this one person to have given them, in addition, here, let's get you some formal training early on and as well, not just make it experiential. But yeah, so I think there's, um, uh, I think we see it in our own, as you said, technologies. We see it all the time, but we tend to do this. I will say, I'm not for ChatGPT. It's interesting. The reason I will bring this one up is that wasn't just going at looking at ontologies. These guys would actually look at things like that and actually use those tools. And that's, again, ChatGPT's November release or whatever, but it was those type of things as well, as to say, hey, what are the formal definitions of impurities or something like that? You just something that could be, you read different, and there'll be different structures or different taxonomies of something that simple. And so they use all different types of tools to do this. So yeah, I think
to add to that, Scale.ai actually has they posted a job opening for a prompt engineer that was paying like $300,000, something insane like that.
Interesting.
Obviously you can't just kind of like hack together some prompts. It's like somebody who really understands the core of knowledge, to get that out of GPT.
Yep, definitely.
It's an interesting point of view.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the presentation and the important work that you're doing. It's earlier I was talking about kind of the change that needs to be managed, and I think you're laying out a good case for how to actually help understand human, the behaviors and drive them. One of the analogies that folks I've heard used, and I want to hear your reaction to it, which is, and I haven't seen this put into practice, but if a company were to approach, in particular, I'm thinking of large, complex organizations, not small startups. If a company were to approach employees and say, hey, just like we ask you to manage human resources, we're asking you to manage data resources. And that's part of your job, whether it's setting goals at the beginning of the year, actually conducting work throughout the year, or measuring performance at the end of the year, and or line managing folks to make that happen for data, which is what you're describing in some of these personas. Do you think that kind of that construct of saying, hey, just like it's everybody's job to manage humans, it's everybody's job to manage data, would that resonate?
I think it does. I think that's one of the things that actually led these folks to do what they were doing. Is we've got this data spread across different labs. We want to bring that. That's our first step, is to get these labs automated. I think that was the big driver, and that's the interesting thing I think about this work for me. And for me, it was a unicorn. I'd never seen it this way. It was always one of those things where you could actually bring an answer to someone and say, here's the answer to your problem. And they wouldn't drink water like a horse. Take the horse to water, it doesn't drink.
Right.
It was the same thing. And have seen this happen without any group pushing, just, hey, we want to standardize data.
Kind of happened
You're responsible
organically
for it. And then people stand up and say, well, I'll take this job. I'll take this job. What if we went and looked here? To me, I thought this was, to your point, this is exactly what I observed.
Yeah. And then my point about mandates this morning, it works more in development than it does in research. Development, understands GLP and GXP, and yes, we have a mandate. But yeah.
Okay.
So let's thank Steve one more time.
Thank you.
And our final speaker of the day before we start our panel is Jans Osman. Jans describes himself as an experimental and cognitive psychologist, but that is just so not where you started. but it's not quite fair, Jens. I think it's I'll say it because you won't. You're one of the founders of this field. One of the founders of the field of knowledge graphs, and one of the main drivers, one of my mentors, and I'm really happy to have you here to talk about some of your work and applying knowledge graphs in healthcare. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My identity is still psychologist and not computer scientist, but okay. I was going to give a talk called Building a Healthcare Life Science Knowledge Graph, and without my knowledge, our sales guy Craig added with ChatGPT, right? So, and he told me that last Thursday. Anyway, so that's fun. I mean, I could talk all day about ChatGPT. So, this is actually two talks. One of them is a plug and play healthcare knowledge graph that we built for hospitals. It's so hard to convince hospitals to build a knowledge graph, and you can have all the services you want, but they have to be convinced first. So we built a plug and play knowledge graph with Cynthia in there for realistic healthcare data, all the taxonomies you want, huge library of example questions and methods, right? And that makes it way easier to just give it to someone so they can start playing with a Jupyter notebook. Anyway, so that is the first thing. And the second is LLMs. So, oh, this is back, right? This one here. We do a lot of work with LLMs in call center analytics, where we take conversations between agents and customers, where we get insights out of conversations. And ChatGPT is, GPT is just amazing for that, right? We also started using it big time for our healthcare knowledge graph, and I'm going to talk about that too. I think I'll only get to the first 2 or 3. That's it for today. And if we have some time left, if we don't have, I could talk about how I filled a complete knowledge graph with wine, a wine knowledge graph, automatically using LLM. But anyway, okay, let me go just straight and not lose time. So for years, we worked with the big hospital in the Bronx, Montefiore, and we helped them build big knowledge graphs in huge scale, and we learned an incredible amount, right? And we're very proud that in 2021, we were chosen as one of the top data fabrics in this space of data fabrics and hospitals. So, I mean, so we know what to do, right, in healthcare, or especially hospitals, let me say it that way. And we use this model that we call the entity event knowledge graph, where we say, well, in the domain of healthcare, but this applies to many domains, you have one core entity, and then anything that happens to the patient over time becomes a simple object. We call it an event object with a type, a start time, end time, and a few key value pairs to describe that particular event, all attached to the patient and then logically grouped so you can shard it over a cluster of machines. And then, of course, everything in your knowledge graph needs to be terminated in taxonomies, right? And so we got this down. This is the typical picture that I like to show, where you have your, no, where's the thingy? Oh, here. No, go back. Right, here's your entity. Then you have events. Can we go from all the way from demographics to any kind anything that happens within the hospital with the patients, and then ultimately terminating into your knowledge bases. And so that's kind of the core of the entity event knowledge graphs that we're building. And then I can talk about many different benefits, but I think the main benefit of having a knowledge graph in healthcare is that your queries become roughly 100 times more simple to write and to understand, right? So that's one. And the other thing that I talk about a lot is, if you try in a hospital to say, give me everything about Deborah McGinnis, they laugh at you, right? But because you're in too many databases, you're probably in 1,000 databases. But once you got it in a knowledge graph, it's one click, one line, and you got the beautiful JSON object that describes you, right? Anyway, so as I said in the beginning, so you have this beautiful knowledge graph, but how can you show this knowledge graph if all the data in your knowledge graph is protected, right? You can't appear all the personal health information, you can't share it. There was a huge problem that we had, so we finally decided, okay, we're just going to build an entire one using Cynthia. Who has played with Cynthia in this audience? Okay, so there's one. You might have done some of that. Yeah, so really stunned with how good it is. I mean, some things are missing. And Mimic 2 has some more stuff about ICU data, but still it's a really good data set if you want to start, right? And so we built this thing here where we have, well, what we found, the most important thing is I can now give it to someone in a hospital that then can show to the leadership and to their colleagues, right? To kind of show, okay, what can I do with a knowledge graph in a hospital? Now, the big hospitals in the United States already are building them. There's so many hospitals, right, that they don't even know where to start. So that is the first thing. A complete plug and play knowledge graph that you can show to your colleagues. And then we have this library for literally almost anything that a hospital cares about, right? Standard reporting. You have the CMS quality reporting for Medicare, Medicaid. You have, if you want to do entity prediction, right? We can, with one line, get all the events for a person, and you can feed it to machine learning algorithms to do event prediction. Feature extraction, claim reporting. So Cynthia has claims data, so we have a lot of queries around computing claims. Cohort selection, similarity search, it's all in our set, in our library to kind of start going. Then the data sets, well, it's Cynthia, it is everything in UMLS. It's the FIRES database, you know, that vaccine advanced sorry, what's the anyway, the vaccine database. And we have a lot of PubMed articles in there, just as an example of what you can do with this, all integrated. And I'll show you in a second how we do that. And then very important, almost every hospital that we talk to wants security, right? They want to make sure that you put all the data in one place, but now how do you protect your data, right? And you can't put it in different repositories that you save, but you have this one big database. How do I protect certain parts from certain people? So we have several mechanisms to do that, and we implemented that already as an example in our knowledge graph. So they can see it's a really, really safe knowledge graph. Then people say, yeah, but I have 10 million patients. Will that scale? So we have a data set from Cynthia running on a cluster of 12 machines where we run about 10 million patients using Cynthia data. And all our libraries work with that big data set. And then, of course, the question is, can I use my own data? And that's, of course, the whole point for us, to help hospitals build their own data into this knowledge graph. So this is the picture of the data sets. We have UMLS in the middle. We have, well, all these parts of UMLS that you would expect, including the semantic network. And then one of the speakers this morning told us that 80% of all the medical data is unstructured, right? Well, in our data set, it definitely is the case. So we use BioBird for entity extraction and our own UMLS mapping system. So we take articles from PubMed, we take the unstructured text in the clinical trials, we take the FIRES database unstructured text, although there's not much in there, and then we have the text in Cynthia itself, all linked together via UMLS. So now it's all big one system. And so now if you look at our graph, let's see if I can do it here, right? So this is kind of the graph that I showed in the beginning. It's the medical records, just a few fields in this case, right? Linked to UMLS. And then there's clinical trials that we also use to the UMLS. So now you can link patients to clinical trials. So now, for example, we can say for a particular kind of patient, okay, find me clinical trials that are relevant, or given a clinical trial, find me patients that might be relevant, right? So, and there's examples in our notebooks to do that query. And then we have the course 19 to the PubMed literature, again, linked to everything else, and then the FIRES database, right? So it's a knowledge graph that literally, through the unstructured text, links everything together. Okay, so now for the fun part of the meeting, of this talk. So who's using LLM for healthcare data? You are? And you, okay. So I've been for a long time really interested in causal graphs, yeah, using Bayesian statistics or just taking text and trying to find causal relationships, and it was always so hard, right? We were building rule-based systems to extract it. We worked for a long time for the Stanford Research Institute, where they were taking you remember that probably, right? The Biology 101 textbook, right? We had 30 people basically annotating every chapter in that book to say this causes this, and this causes this, and this causes this, right? It was a horrible job to do for these people, right? It was really horrible. But now the amazing thing is that you can just ask GPT, right? So the prompt is, so here's an example of a causal chain from A to B to C, and then you get the adjacent object right here. And then you have used this representation to show a causal chain between COVID-19 and colon cancer. Make sure that each of the URLs point to a real medical article or web page that covers the from A to B, right? So you give it the structure that you want, you ask the question, and you get great results. I mean, so basically, here's one chain, right, where you see from COVID-19 pandemic to disruption in healthcare system, from disruptions in healthcare system to delayed colon cancer screenings, etc., all the way to increased rate of undetected colon cancer, right? Now, there's great results in terms of this, but literally every link, oh, let me go back here. Half the links, right, didn't exist, and the other half was wrong, completely fabricated, right? So that's kind of a bummer. But what we found out is that you can actually use GPT plus web search to correct those mistakes, and that's kind of amazing. But we spent a lot of time always on validating results, even in the wine database that I won't have time for, I guess. But even in the wine database, we always have to do a second or even a third question to get there, right? So in this case, we do the prompt, find articles that prove that there is a causal relationship from COVID-19 pandemic to disruptions in healthcare system, right? And then you get 4 links, and we check them manually, right, just to see if this is reasonable. And I always ask for my results as a one single atom, or a Python list, or a JSON object. And if a JSON object, I tell beforehand what the JSON object is that I want to get back, right? Because otherwise I get text, and then GPT doesn't help because I go from text to text, and I still have the same problem, right? Anyway, so you get a list, and then in this case, I mean, they're all real and spectacular, right? So these links. So if I want to show that then in graph, in our visualization tool, right, now I go from COVID-19 to cause. The strength is 4, according to GPT, to this factor, to this factor, to this factor. And I can show then here. And I can attach all the reference, of course, to this, right? And then another part of the art of prompting, right, is how do you ask GPT to do another causal chain, right? That doesn't copy the first one, because that took me a long time, but I now have figured out how to do this, right? I'm not going to tell you because I want to get the job, right, that you just talked about. But so this is finding causal chains. So another one that I was interested in is how do you find links between, say, increased salt intake and higher blood pressure, right? And so I have this big UMLS database. I can do a shortest path between increased salt intake and increased blood pressure. And I get all the relationships. I get all the relationships in this particular UMLS network. But it's not really causal, right? It's just semantic relationships in terms of words. But the cool thing is, I can also now ask ChatGPT. So I've used, in this case, Sparkle, and I can show in a minute how we did that. I use Sparkle to ask for JSON objects back, given my particular prompt. And so now you have this, I mean, and I hope you can see this here. It's probably a little bit hard to see. Oh yeah, you can see it here. It all links all the way back here. So I got 3 causal chains plus all the UMLS relationships. So, I mean, I don't know with you guys, but I'm kind of completely excited by this, right? Because I can now, there's a million there's a trillion knowledge graphs in ChatGPT, right? It's just a matter of how you get it out and how do you check what you get back is really true. But it's really amazing that you can, in this combination. And this brings me to the point. I'm writing this article. Let me first do the last one. The last use case here. So the other thing is, so we have this knowledge graph that we give to hospitals. And this one hospital said, yeah, but that's great, Jans, but you know what the hardest thing for us is? Medical notes, right? We really need the medical notes. So one of my colleagues who's really, really good with GPT created prompts. So he wrote a program to create prompts that then gives you the answer. So basically, what you see here is a prompt that's actually, it's a query against, oh, Jesus. Yeah, this is here. So this is one of the people, providers in the Cynthia. This is one of the patients with her age doing an outpatient encounter in this particular county. And so this is, so you do a Sparkle query, right, to get these parameters. And then you look at the last 5 conditions, the last 5 procedures, the last 5 medications, even the last 5 observations, the findings, the last 5 encounters. And then the rest of the prompt, after examining the patient, Marianne wrote up the following detailed clinical report, noting any observations, recommendations, lab orders, prescriptions, or follow-ups in a narrative or structured style. And he made a misspelling, but ChatGPT doesn't care about that, right? And then you get a medical note, which is kind of, I mean, so my hospital was happy with it. There's doctors here in the room, right? So they might think it's too artificial, but still, it's kind of amazing. And there's recommendations that were not in the original observations. Anyway, so so the premise of this article that I'm writing is that future intelligent applications are really a collaboration between a human being, a very smart human being, right, an LLM, and a knowledge graph. I think these knowledge graphs and LLMs are made for each other, because if you just ask questions and you can't store these questions anywhere, right, then it's fairly fleeting. And you can't say, ask a ChatGPT, okay, so how many, let me go back to wines here. How many wines have high tannins and very low sugar contents and are aging very well, right? That's, it will give you a wishy-washy answer, but if you create a wine knowledge graph, then you actually can, right? So anyway, let me conclude this picture, and then I go to your wine example. So here, yeah. So basically, the conclusion for what I was just trying to say is that a plug-and-play knowledge graph is really a big step forward, right? To get hospitals to think about knowledge graphs, and endless possibilities for LLMs. Okay, so that is the part about my talk, and now about the wine. Here's my wine knowledge graph. So this was created completely automatically, and I'm going to show you a Sparkle query how we do that later, right? Where you have France. I hate that thing. Yeah, so France has 2 regions, some main wines, some what I call individual wines. I need a better word for that, but vintage is only the year, right? So what do you call it? And it's, by the way, not in your ontology. And by the way, this is Deborah's ontology mostly. So here you get this, and then you get that this one has these grapes, these node profiles. What is this, medium, high? Anyway, you get my point, right? So this is the knowledge graph that we have. And I'm 100% sure that GPT read Deb's article. 100% sure. There's no way they could not have done that. So I just got back that, right? But I used your ontology, but you missed the note. So you didn't have the tastes that the wine has. So I said, hey, give me the ChatGPT, give me all the taste that an expert uses to describe a wine, right? And I gave you the first 3. There's 3 more, but so you have fruit flavors, herb spice flavors, oak flavors, etc. Right? And then, okay, what kind of grapes do you have? Of course, they need to be objects, right? And then what grapes are there, for example, in Bordeaux? You can ask that too, right? And there's 5, everyone knows that, right? Here. And then I say, usually, give me 200 Bordeaux wines. I did a small example here. And then give me a few examples of these Bordeaux wines. And I get the Chateau Latour Premier Grand Cru 2012, I believe. Anyway, and then I say, okay, describe this wine to me, right? As a JSON object. And I get these tasting notes. But that's way too much work for me. So I said, I made a much bigger prompt where I had to prompt how I wanted to get my results back about the wine, right? And, well, here's a beautiful example. Let me go here. And so here's an example. I mean, this is kind of super cool, right? That you can just construct this. And we have, and one of the things you always have to do is you have to force ChatGPT to use your predicates. Otherwise, they vary with this, and then you still have to do the mapping to predicates, right? But anyway, you learn how to do that. Of course, you want to have food pairings for this. And then I wanted reviews. And in the beginning, I asked for reviews, and ChatGPT said, well, I can't give you reviews. We stopped in 2021. I can't look it up. So, but what I can do is I can make it up, right? Just like a human being, you know it's in the wine and you make it up, right? So this is what it made up. This is a description of the Latour 2012. And by the way, I was in Atlanta 2 weeks ago giving a talk about something else, and I gave this example. He said, okay, let me call. And he called his favorite restaurant, and in the evening I drank that wine, which is amazing. But so anyway, this is what I call fantasy reviews, right? More like human reviews. And then you can also use the web. So does anyone use here web chat GPT? Well, yeah, but web chat GPT is a plugin that you get into your GPT, right? And basically, you ask a question, it goes to the web, it finds 3, 6, 10 links, whatever you specify. ChatGPT will read it and then answer the original question. Again, you get amazing results if you use that trick. So, so that was that. And then finally, here we've built this. So if our newest version of a Lego graph comes out real soon, 7.4.0, we have a magic predicate in our Sparkle. So you can see, do a prompt and give me 1 word back. Do a prompt, give me a Python list back. Do a prompt and give me the JSON object back, right? And so here is a series of, this is, I mean, you can try it out yourself. It will be an example query in our database. You do this set of insert queries, and this is the picture you get when you do it, right? But I think, and then of course, the most important thing is you can't trust anything, right? So you have to do a lot of test queries to see if, once you do a web search, if it actually gave you the answers back. So some people describe old socks as a taste in wine, right? So I say, huh? Dirty socks. Well, I wanted to keep it nice. So is old socks one of the many tasting notes for the Chateau Latour? I prefer a yes or no answer. If you're not certain, say I don't know. If you can't find any relevant information, say no information available, right? And this uses web search, and it says, yeah, no information available. And here's even a query where we delete information if the prompt is no, right? So you get your data filled in, and then this is the query where you say delete this data if I can't find it on the web, right? So anyway, that was it. Any questions?
So I think you've set up our panel wonderfully. So maybe what we'll do is take some questions on the first part, and we'll take the rest into the panel.
Hey, great talk. I'm Yang. I'm working for a CPG company. So I have a quick question regarding, you use this to build the knowledge graph. Of course, it will alleviate a lot of the effort required expert to manually craft the ontology, all the things. So the first question is, all the large language models, they trained on, usually there's a cutoff time, let's say, based on the knowledge till 2022.
Mm-hmm.
They are static. How do you incorporate the latest knowledge and also related?
But that's what we now do, right? There's a Python framework called LangChain. There's AutoGPT. There's WebChat GPT. Those are systems where you can go to the web, do your search, filter out the Google advertisement links, right? Now you get it, or we use DuckDuckGo. You get a set of links, let ChatGPT read it, and then answer the question. So now this is kind of the stopgap, right, to deal with the fact that these models entered a particular date. And your first question about ontologies, I do not believe that ChatGPT is really good at ontologies. Human beings need to do these ontologies. There's too many complications and issues with the. But once you have an ontology, right, you can use it. And I'm the one thing I'm really excited. And my talk is already gone. But those picture where you have this relation, the causal relationships, and the knowledge graph relationship, right? That is, if you really think about it, it's amazing that you can use this knowledge graph to embody both your hard-coded knowledge and your whatever you can get out of GPT or an LLM.
Yeah, so the related question on the second part is the existing knowledge, even the the current training document, right? You use the word fantasy to describe one of the answers, right? A lot of people call this hallucination, right? They simply make up answers. Do you have any thoughts? How do we alleviate? How do we reduce the error rate? Because in medical diagnosis, you wanted to avoid any mistakes, I guess.
Well, I just heard this morning about the 60-30-10 rule. So there's a lot of mistakes going on anyway, right? So I wonder if ChatGPT does way worse than a doctor, right? But the whole point is you have to build a framework where an LLM will generate data, and now you have to test to filter out what is clearly not existing. And then you get a gray area where I don't know what to do, right? But I can't give you a solution, right, where you give the 100% sure answer, because a human being can't do it either, right? I mean,
Yeah, that's a fair argument.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Any final questions for Jans before we move on to the panel? Or we can pick them up there.
All right.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jens. All right, I'm going to pass this over to Deborah to get us started.
Okay, so the next up is the panel on knowledge graphs and large language models. So would the people who were supposed to be on the panel come up? And actually, I'm not positive that I know all the people who are supposed to be on the panel.
I have my thingy, right?
Yeah.
Is there enough chairs? Oh.
Oh.
We can.
I'll get down.
Get another one.
We have really.
Comfy chairs.
Huh?
Comfy chairs.
If we do this,
Yeah.
it's close in here,
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
and then we get one more there, right? You can sit there, Eric, on the.
We can probably walk another.
Yeah.
To do it peacefully, or you know what?
And the podium.
Grab two
doesn't-
chairs.
I'm just going to stand at the podium. Or,
Yeah, if we put this
That's a
thing.
good point. Regular chairs.
oh, yeah. It's a fireside chat.
Oh,
right?
he's
It's a.
Eric can.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to let everybody just say one sentence about themselves to provide background. And the goal of this panel is to explore knowledge graphs and large language models. And my plan was to ask all of the panelists for threats and opportunities. But, you know, my question, if there was more time for Jans, was knowledge graphs and large language models, are they really made for each other? So
For me?
well, why
So-
don't we go down the panel once and you say one sentence about yourself to give perspective of where you're going to come from, and then we'll give opportunities for threats and opportunities. And I want to open it to the audience as well. Okay, so Jamie's first.
Okay, so I'm Jamie McCusker. I've been actually working with neural nets longer than I've been working with knowledge graphs, but I think that large language models are complete and utter bullshit.
Okay. Provocative is good.
You're next.
No, I've got my hand. Yeah. I'm very tired about all these conversations about whether this is real AR or not. I don't even care anymore, but I think it's an amazing language tool that you can use in God knows how many different ways. So.
And the one sentence about you?
Oh, well, Jans Aasman, CEO of France Inc. and working with knowledge graphs for 17 years now.
So I'm Helena Deus. I'm a data nerd. I'm a bioinformatics scientist, and I love anything that can take boring, repetitive work from human beings so that they can be creative. And so I love LLMs.
John Apathy. I've been spending 30 plus years in pharma, mostly in R&D, and just about everything I've learned about knowledge graphs and LLM have come from Lena.
I'm Tom Plaster at AstraZeneca. So I'm a relative newcomer to large language models, but have been in the knowledge graph space for a number of years. And I think one of the things I'm trying to do is figure out how to translate this effectively into our organization. And I'm seeing more and more and more interesting examples. So now the question isn't, if, it's really a when, and how do we get people on board with this?
Eric Newman. I am a card-carrying Drosophila geneticist originally, and it was about that same time that I started playing with neural nets. Not to do anything with the flies except analyze their genetics and their output. But I've been interested in semantic graphs for a long time, and I kept pushing Tim Berners-Lee to start a healthcare life science working group, and we finally got that going. But my main, I would say, interest in keeping an eye on is where people are taking this computational frame with large language models, which I don't think any of us knew that if you throw in that much information and that much memory, it starts to put together very interesting kind of patterns. I even think you could take the notion of the hallucinations, and by putting a little bit of restraint on that, you can make it hypothesis generation. So that's something I would like to investigate more.
Cool. So we heard a few opportunities and we heard one significant naysayer here. Well, so you were the odd person out on the initial statement. So let's be controversial.
Okay, so I do want to say that I'm not entirely negative on large language models or generative AI as a whole. I'm actually using it for some very interesting things. But the thing is that you have to very tightly control what you're doing with it, as Jans showed, that it's not like there's no magic there. You have to really you basically have to really kind of push the language model into a very specific activation space. And so one of the things that I see as as an opportunity within large language models is is prompt engineering, but that's not the same thing as the hype that's actually surrounding LLMs in the mainstream media. And so I think that we need to separate out so there's the technical fact that, it is a bullshit engine, but it is also producing a lot of hype around it that is also often unwarranted from kind of the media. It is a useful tool. It's an incredibly useful tool, though. I'm using it for things. But I do want to I do want to pitch out the idea that large language models are a smooth-brained organism. there's a continuous space within any embedding space, whether it's language models, graph models, any sort of backpropagation based system currently, because they have basically a continuous activation curve. And so there's a bias that humans have when they think. And this bias goes back all the way to the first brains, not just the first vertebrate, basically the first vertebrate brains, possibly before that. It's probable that squids and octopi think the same way. And we think about things and the relationships between those things. Guess what that sounds like? But most neural system or most artificial neural networks don't have that bias. So I think that in order to get these systems to start thinking conceptually, to start thinking about them in ways that we might actually be able to trust, we need to make them lumpy, basically. We need to have these attractors within the activation space that correspond to things in reality that it's experiencing somehow. And so we do that without it's not like we have direct access to reality. We just have our perceptions. These systems have their perceptions too.
Okay, so that might lead into your statement of knowledge graphs and large language models made for each other. From some of the points that Jamie just made, do you really think they're made for each other? And give us some evidence and some particular fruitful directions for the general knowledge graph, both the people here as well as those listening later.
Well, to begin with, one statement, two statements. One, if I hear a person bullshitting right now, I just say, hey, you're ChatGPTing, right? Because this is a lot of people do that, right? It's just word after word after word. Doesn't make any sense, but they like to hear each other talk, right? So that's one thing. Second thing is, if Kingsley Idean said it way better than I do, but I would say if dumb people ask dumb questions, they get dumb answers, right? Kingsley Idean said if people with vacuous minds ask questions. Anyway, that's so you have to be really smart to get. You have to be smart, and you have to be a domain expert to be able to deal with a particular result, right? If you're not, you can be smart but not know anything about the domain, then it doesn't work. If you don't know and you only don't know the domain, but you don't know how to ask the questions, you also get nothing, right? So you kind of need a good balance between domain knowledge and knowing how to do the prompting. Then the other thing is, I've given you a bunch of examples, right? Of like 6 on the line. We have clinical trials. Clinical trials have inclusion and exclusion criteria, right? But there's no standard for it, so people just mix it up, right? Sometimes someone does first all the inclusion and then the exclusion. Someone, they just mix them. ChatGPT, you just give the inclusion criteria, and it said split between input and output. Sorry, inclusion, exclusion. Does a perfect job, better than a regular expression in the rules, right? You use it as a tool. It's a tool, knows about language, and I trust ChatGPT better than my regular expressions to get out of it, right? So then I think the thing is, so knowledge graphs are for structured information, right? So you can do aggregate queries, how many people this, how many people that, right? That's not in ChatGPT, right? So basically you extract structured knowledge from GPT, put it in a knowledge graph, and that allows you to do higher level queries, right? About things, to find correlations yourself through doing your own statistics or whatever. Right? So basically I use ChatGPT GPT to get, to take unstructured information, whether or not I ask without giving it web search. That's, by the way, another really important thing, right? You can ask ChatGPT without the web search, right? You can answer what it learned, but it's also really good, as I said before, right? do your query, you get 10 results back. You said, please read it and then answer the question, right? And again, it will give you a summary and structured info. You can even ask for structured information. Now, a human being could do it, would spend 20 minutes reading, right? ChatGPT does it in 5 seconds, right? And I get data back. And even then I can, for each sub-result, again, ask if there's proof on the web for this particular thing that I just discovered. So it's, yeah, but it's the mix of structured and unstructured. Plus it's very smart human being to put it all together, right? So are they made for each other? The article that I'm writing, right, is literally about LLM and a knowledge graph and a human being have to work together to get a really good result. Does it make sense?
Cool. Yeah. Yes. All right. You wanted.
A counter argument. Okay, good.
So GPT, as with most larger language models, they have basically two ingredients. It's the transformer model, which takes 3 character embeddings and positional encoding. But there's a second piece, right, which is what made GPT so attractive, which is the reinforcement learning with human feedback. And so in my mind, that knowledge GPT has is only as good as the people, the humans who are giving it the feedback. And so they were general purpose people. OpenAI didn't go hire scientists and doctors and nurses to do the reinforcement learning. And so the way my PhD advisor taught me about, what a PhD is, he described knowledge as this sphere of, everything that humans have ever accumulated, right? And the PhD is like you're pushing against that sphere a little bit, right? It's like you're a little dot, pushing against the boundary of knowledge. And GPT knowledge, we could claim it's very right in many things, for sure, right? But it really can't tell when you're getting to a part of knowledge that's really at the boundary. And so it doesn't know when it's crossed the boundary. Whereas a human being, a scientist empowered by a knowledge graph, which initially it's in our heads, right? We put a knowledge graph in a computer when we're ready for it. But a human being can tell when they're pushing the boundary versus kind of being way outside of that boundary. So I think in fields that are still being discovered, still being understood, there is a very strong danger that GPT is going in and out of that boundary of knowledge without, the human on the other side having any notion of what's right and what's wrong from its answers.
Yeah, I think for the wine knowledge graph, I didn't care if there was a wrong tasting note, right? But for medical, it's probably a little bit more important that you get it right. But I think it's a win for
Humanity.
Well, no, not for humanity. I don't think so. But for the knowledge graph community.
I would push back against the idea that GPT knows anything. I don't think it doesn't know. It doesn't know. It doesn't work that way. It's not literal. Like the way we think about knowledge or knowing something, it has a set of words that it thinks are the best, thinks is generous too. It has, it puts one word in front of the other. And sometimes that can really look like knowledge. And it can do something that looks like information retrieval, but it's not. It's purely generative and not in any way that resembles something that looks like memory for humans.
I know. I don't want to take all the time, but one answer here is, so I'm a cognitive scientist, right? And I cringe every time when I see that word knowledge, right? Because a knowledge graph doesn't know anything, right? It's just a dumb graph database, right? But that a human being tried to structure in an intelligent way. But then you have GPT that will give you, like you just said, right? The next best thing it can find, right? By stringing words together, by the training that you just talked about. And then the third thing is a human being. For the wine database, you take one sip of wine and you know your wine, right? But because you're grounded in your senses, right? Except we can't talk about it, right? I cannot explain. I taste it, I know it. And now, because I'm not a wine expert, I don't know how to write it up, right? So you can say, I know it, but what use is that, right? Because so there's 3 types of knowing that you have in this case.
To sort of building off of both of your points, there was New York Times article not too long ago, editorial from Noam Chomsky and another contributor, talking about how it's really not language that we're talking about. And Noam Chomsky's been in this field obviously forever, one of the founders, and he was right. Of course, he was right, and it very much echoes Jamie's comments. But that doesn't mean that ChatGPT is not useful, as long
Yeah,
as you
exactly.
have the guide that Jans wants. That's really smart human to help you get past the fact that we're just talking about statistical correlations.
Yeah.
So I really like the way that you frame that. So smart human, LLMs, knowledge graph. So I think that is the key. So.
And Jans and I aren't really, well, at least I'm not disagreeing with him about that. I think that that's like probably the best place to be, but I feel like the things that we want to do with it need a fundamentally different neural model under the covers.
Yeah, I second that. I think it also challenges us to try to, we think we know it, but it really forces us to try to define what knowing means, right? I don't think that's a real well-defined concept. It doesn't fit in a lot of places. In friend of a friend's, that's not knowing because it's symmetric, and I can know something the other person doesn't know back. But I think one thing that we get entranced by, I think the word entranced, which is also not formal, it has a flow. And I don't know if any of you've heard in psychology the concept of flows. Musicians and other artists like dancers, they know this. There's a part where the brain is sort of knowing what it's doing, but it's like an autopilot. It gets to see itself without having to worry about driving. And the flow that comes out of after a prompt, that sequence of notes is something that's irresistible to most people. It starts to like, why does that seem to resonate? And then you almost forget if the content is valid or not. But there's a flow in this. And that's intriguing. If it does flows, it doesn't have to be just verbal flows. It could be something that's more complex. For instance, you're talking about positional embedding. There are other types of embeddings. We could use the knowledge graphs of some areas that we know a lot as a structure, and it's ordered as an embedding to work, in transformer models. That's something I don't know how much effort that's going to take, but it's an interesting thing that it's not just about the position, which is usually a combination of sine and cosine waves. You could use structures for that. So I'm thinking there's a lot of other ways to make LLMs.
Cool. Well, John is the only person who hasn't commented yet. And one thing, if you want a prompt, one of your images was Einstein's quote of "In chaos comes opportunity," or "In great change comes opportunity." That might be something that you might be suited to comment on.
Yeah, I was just thinking about my contribution to this discussion. And it probably comes down to a pragmatic, having lived through prior hype cycles. Where are we in this one, and how is it different this time around? And invariably, each one of those have prompted some form of a use case exploration or discovery process to find practical application. And I always find those, whether it was for big data or 2 years ago we did it for machine learning and AI, pre-LLMs, right? But they're all the same use cases. It's all the same business value and needs that need to get addressed. And so it's the same problems being rehashed with new technology. I think I wrote the phrase in silico modeling as a future technology that's going to impact pharma R&D in the year 2001. And here we are, it's arrived, right? And so your comment you made earlier about can we turn hallucinations into hypothesis generation? I think that's a wonderful question. I think of molecular invention and small molecule invention. We need more hypotheses to generate to explode the molecular space, and then find ways to rapidly test that. We had created an interesting construct where we were trying to marry the virtual world with the physical, meaning take all the predictive molecules invented against a target, and then store the predictive results, and then those that actually got made and tested, and use that as a kind of building up of a test set. I don't think anybody's really doing that particularly well. Probably AstraZeneca is. I say it, and I'm sure they are. But in the world of that's available to today, we could save all those results and then actually run them against what was predicted and build a better model. So I do think in this space, the things that are the application to push the boundaries of generative, I think, are the use cases that are the most interesting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would add to that we've got AlphaFold already, right? So there's like a problem that human scientists were taking decades to solve is now solved, right? We can get 3D structures from the sequence of amino acids. But you look at what's coming out of NVIDIA, right? We've got language models where the language is not English. The language is the language of DNA, the language of proteins, and so you can start to envision how, we don't understand. We kind of have some ideas of how DNA turns into molecules, and it turns into proteins, and proteins create cells, and cells create organs, and then we all get sick and we don't know how the heck to translate, kind of like a mutation into a cure. These models, in my mind, are the way to get there, because we don't understand exactly the biology, and they can give us that approximation, right, between what happens to a DNA that gets mutated and the result that in a human being. In my mind, yes, even if it's a black box, how we get from a DNA that's mutated to a cure, and I think I'm fine with no explainability at this point if we get to cure people. So that's my argument for continuing to invest in large language models.
So started using the phrase perfect knowledge of human biology probably about 10 years ago. And, somebody asked me to estimate when would we have that. And I think at the time we said 2050 or some number like that. And perhaps with LLMs, maybe we'll have more perfect knowledge of human biology by which to then understand cures more rapidly, right? And so did we just jump the curve a bit? And that's an interesting question.
I'll just slight build on that. I think we figured out a way to fill up the knowledge graph a lot faster.
Which will get us
which will get us there. But for me, that middle layer of having the knowledge graph well structured, that's always been the slowest part about what we do, but I don't mind that. So it really forces us to think about concepts. It forces us to think about relationships, and then using the LLMs and then using the generative AI to populate it. Okay, then we just make a new scaffolding. So that's really going to help with belief. And so this is where I think we do want to go back to having the 2 or the 3 paired, as suggested.
So I wanted to push a little bit on I'm okay with no explainability. I'm not okay with no explainability.
Me either.
But I am okay with, this was in a podcast from Microsoft where they were pushing the co-pilot notion. And so you were using their tools to guide where you're going. And they use the phrase usefully wrong. And maybe that's another word for hallucination or fantasy or potential hypothesis. But no explainability is not okay from my perspective. But if I jumpstart, a hypothesis that we can explore, maybe that's okay. What do people think?
I'll just since I have this, I'll just jump in real quick. So no explainability is not going to pass muster with the FDA for sure, right? So let's start with the obvious, right? So we need to have traceability. Even when Eric and I were doing biomarker research together 15 years ago, we had beautiful patterns in mass spec around GCMS data that completely explained separation between different populations, those responded well to drugs and those that didn't. Beautiful biomarkers. All right, what is it? We have no idea. It's it's GCMS. It was shattered apart. We don't know what that fragment is, but it's reproducible. So I think we're going to see something really similar. So just because we think it's cool, it's just going to suggest the next experiment, next place to look. But that's not bad. That's not bad at all. And so I'm going to pass this back.
And we have a hard enough time when things are perfectly explainable, like mRNA vaccines, trying to get adoption. It's like, well, I don't understand it. Here, put it in your arm.
Do you know exactly what happens when you eat an apple? Right? Do you think about it? Do you just let your body do its thing? Right? At the end of the day, a lot of what we do on a daily basis, we can explain it, right? And so these AI systems, they are not human intelligence, not at all, right? They are intelligence, but their intelligence comes from these emerging properties. And we're trying to use the best names we have for them, like thinking or knowing. I mean, these are human terms. They're not LLM terms, right? But the reality is, even we can't explain everything we do, right? We're not aware of everything we do to kind of like get through life. And yes, we need to figure out a way to interact with these systems in a way that passes our FDA criteria, right? And so yes, the lumpy knowledge models make sense if we can ask GP. But have you tried asking it to explain step by step how it came to that
Oh,
conclusion?
it's just more bullshit. That's what I'm saying. Is that like I'm not talking about like how you prompt it. I'm saying
So-
that at the foundation, like the neuron, how the ANN works.
Yes, and
is wrong.
and part of the bullshit is because they're too large, right? The human brain only has 86 million connections, right? GPT-4 has 1 trillion connections, and the fact they're very large because they're doing very, very silly things. So there's groups of researchers who are actually they're looking at the weights that are being learned, and some of the experiments they tried. For example, there was one where they asked GPT, how do you, I'm in Rome, how do I see the Eiffel Tower? And he came up with like something like not in the GPT answer, right? That's kind of like pass through policies and whatnot. But it's like when they analyze the weight, is doing something like, oh, move the Eiffel Tower to Rome and then you can see it, right? It's like completely dumb, right? There's no mental model, but it has its own properties, emergent properties, right? So the question to me is not if we should or shouldn't use it to augment our own knowledge graph. It's like when and how.
So since I was a kid, I was stunned by people that could explain why they were doing things, right? Because I never could, and it took me a while before I understood that our behavior is way more controlled by our hormones, right? And by all the hormone systems that we have than actually by what we think why we do things, right? So our human behavior is highly unexplainable. I can tell you that. There's almost no decision whether we make, even if it's a job choice or whatever, we think that we make reasonable choices, but it's all driven by completely different systems, right? And not by logic, right? Logic is the last thing that you finally do as a rationalization why you made the choice, right? A judge, when he judges about a particular case, the level of sanctions, right, he's going to give, he knows I did research on this, within 10 seconds he knows what the sanction is going to be for this crime. And then he spends hours to write all the reasons why he thought that, right? Well, no, he was pattern recognition from the first second on. And now he had to justify against his colleagues and the lawyers, etc., why he made that choice, right? So when people talk about explainability, it's highly overrated, right? I mean, as long as you can predict behavior, right? Or force behavior to occur in a certain way that you want, then you have an explainable system, right? Because you said,
Right, but that's not science.
huh? That's 100% science. You do it. You do an experimental variation.
You're right.
And
That's how
measure
you
it,
come
and
up with a thesis, you know,
Yeah.
what you want to do. But
Right.
then what you do is, now I got to build that experiment that tests not just my ideas, but all the counter ideas. And there's no other way out, but that thing is proven. So you do it late, but that's
do
the
it.
end of the story then.
I was a psychologist working in a telecom lab, right? So just how it works with all these incredible smart engineers. I said, it takes me usually 3 questions, maybe 4. And then they say, well, that I don't know, right? So what is the level that you want for explainability, right? Down to the level of quantum or electrons or what do you call
But
it? Currents.
guessing at the beginning is
the
good.
whole point is,
Right.
right? It's just you choose a level of
Yeah.
where you accept your explainability level.
Well, yeah, and then there's a social, like, that's acceptable. You don't have to go deeper, but
Yeah.
And new things that are very different have a hard time cutting through that. I was going to ask, someone had mentioned earlier the Allen Institute they had a TED talk.
Yep.
Did anyone see that one?
Yep,
No.
yep, I was
Okay.
there.
You were there.
I was
Okay.
there. Yejing Chow gave a talk
That's what I'm
on,
saying.
so it came out of the DARPA-funded Machine Common Sense program.
Right.
So she gave a talk basically, and it's up now. I haven't seen it, but she said it was up a couple
Yeah, it
days
is.
ago.
I just looked
Yeah.
it up.
Okay.
If you
So
haven't
she
seen
was.
it, see it. It's very good.
Yeah, and actually there was a whole AI session. So Brockman, the CEO of OpenAI, opened the session. Gary Marcus was there, and Yejing was there, and her main premise was, we're not going to get acceptance of LLMs unless they get common sense. And by the way, common sense is like hard. But yeah, and the metrics that we're using to test common sense, the language models were killing it before OpenAI. So this program is 3.5 years long, and the metrics that for testing in year 4 were being beaten by the machine learning models in year 1. But that just tells me that the metrics are not adequate.
Yeah.
But her big premise was we need common sense. But this metrics and testing angle is something that I wanted to make sure we spent a little bit of time on, because the world is really calling for guardrails and stopping for 6 months and kind of ethical approaches. What do you think we should be doing do you think this is an opportunity? I'll expose my bias. I think this is an opportunity for knowledge graphs and semantics people to talk about the metrics and transparency. What do you think we should be doing to respond? What do you think the big field should be doing to respond to those requirements, like the AI Bill of Rights?
Well, I think you can't stop it because you may stop, but somebody else is going to continue and they're going to acquire it. So it's sort of ridiculous.
Yeah.
So going forwards with current and possible future issues and putting some kind of metric and guardrail is a good discussion. I don't think it has to be policy yet, but I think to understand where there's going to be trouble, I mean, it's why we do genomic research in viruses, even though we like to, suggest that they leak out every once in a while. But I think you have to look at it. And I think the knowledge graph approach is coming up more and more often as the right orthogonal system that doesn't get screwed in its thinking, or whatever you want to call it, of an LLM, and might be the perfect fence for that.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the places that I'm going. And by the way, Brockman from OpenAI, in his opening talk said, one of the reasons we put out OpenAI was to let the world test it. Which, is a position. You understand the position. Whether it's wise or not is another question. But, do we as a field have some technology that can help?
So I'm going to riff off a little bit of where Jans and Jamie started, and talk a little bit about one of your earlier questions. And I'll come back to this about sort of the dangers and kind of the framing of that, right? So people are worried about jobs, and they're worried about Skynet, right? So those are your two extremes. The jobs argument, I think, kind of comes down to there will be jobs that are lost. There always are. There's going to be jobs that are gained. And we see, this new job opportunity that Jans has thanks to laying around prompts. And then there's going to be those that are changed. And I think a lot of us are going to be in the middle. Our jobs are going to be changed. I mean, I'm looking at this personally as a great opportunity to populate my knowledge graph. I've said that. So I think the second one is, the bigger one about Skynet. I'm only half joking about that, but we have so many popular culture memes that this just fits directly into it. And it's not unwise to stop, pause, and think about this, but it's also smart to go back and go, all right, where's this coming from? How long have we had this in our popular culture, or even earlier? And this even gets back to some of Eric's points about what do we know, and how does this get more frightening about what do we know or what do we don't know? And so I think all of those things are kind of factoring in, and now we're at this point where we're just seeing the glimpse of a new horizon that we haven't really thought about. And so now, if I can take it back, and I wish I could give you a more intelligent answer about how the knowledge graph community can rescue all of this, but I think it does kind of come back to my point about, okay, this is something we do usually slowly, and usually with a fair amount of care and deliberation. And we start arguing about things like, what's a gene? I think Jamie and I were revamping that argument again. We spent a long time kind of going through and getting some sort of a consensus about what that means. So I think that's healthy. And so for us to really kind of have that broad community debate around the knowledge graphs and not really be super concerned about how fast it is, be more concerned about adoption, and be more concerned about, really seeing where that comes together and helps us with healthcare, I think we're going to be better off. So.
I actually was completely against this 6-month, slowdown until I listened to Max Tegmark's podcast on Lex Freeman yesterday, and he actually points out a very valid argument. He says, Microsoft and Google are now stuck in this Morlock monster dilemma. Each of them has to be the bigger, better AI. And they're optimizing for one thing, profit, because there is a ginormous amount of money to be made from the company that wins this race. We're already seeing, Bing eat up a little bit of the Google market because they integrated OpenAI into their search system. And his point is very valid. What he says is Sam Altman and the guy from Google, whose name I forget, they want to stop. They've both publicly said, this is moving too fast. We need regulation. We need to kind of be told what not to do with these systems. And he says the 6 months, the 6 month is just so that the people who understand this field, which are not necessarily the lobbyists or the politicians, give them time to kind of think through the implications, write a paper, write a report that explains, much like we did with CRISPR, right? Where nowadays no scientist that is worthy of their name will use CRISPR to add genes to human babies, even though it's perfectly possible. So this is what he wants to achieve: 6 months to let the people who understand the field agree on what we as a community of AI researchers will not do, so that research can continue, right? But within these guardrails that ensure that humanity, even though we've created this new species of intelligence, can continue to persist, and evolve into a sustainable future. So that's, I'm kind of now I kind of understand the reason of the 6 months. And to your question, I do agree that this is an opportunity for the knowledge, because we're the people who are not just okay with creating a schema, an ontology out of a database. We want to think carefully about what that means. So I do think we, as a community, should be part of that debate, because the one thing I think we all care deeply about is truth, right? And I do think a lot of these conversations around regulations and creating these boundaries around which we can continue to evolve the large language models are going to be around when is it okay to use these large language models to manipulate people, to create spam, to, because they already are being used for that, right? It's, not creating knowledge graph it's a fun application, but I'm scared that once being released into the internet, which it already is, right, it can start, it can activate the quantum computers that IBM has, for example. It can fake credit cards. It can start using, I'm a Mechanical Turk or Crowdflower to get people to do tasks. I mean, and we'll be completely oblivious to that. All of these things are happening, right?
Yeah, I'm really afraid that Google is going to put advertisement in the responses, right? So if I'm looking for a good power drill, if you pay Google, you'll go to the top, right? It's like, because paid advertisement is a problem. So now you can put it in the model itself. That would be really, really. But a question you should ask: do you guys want to have a model without the guardrail? Because I would like to have that. Yeah, there's a lot of things I cannot do because there's guardrails. If I'm analyzing agent customer calls, right? And I say, did the agent talk negatively about this product? ChatGPT refuses, right? It knows it's in there. I first have to say, I disagree. There is a negative statement. And then they say, oh yeah, you're right. It says a negative thing about this particular product. But there's so many things that it will not answer, right? But it's reality. It's out there on the web, because they trained it not to say bad things about people.
Was that?
Huh?
Yeah. Was
Model user agreement.
Once
you sign that, and you're part of that, you're part of a group that is able to, and they know who you are. You can look at this sort of open or unconstrained version, but you have to sign
there's
it.
a New Zealand company that's creating a right-wing GPT, a left-wing GPT, and a neutral GPT. Political. So
are you using the web interface or are you using the actual API?
Both. But I did the query, why are there so many mass killings in the United States on schools, right? And I took that answer, which was what you usually would expect, say, from the Washington Post, New York Times, right? The big answer, because I'm going to test it once the right-wing GPT and the left-wing GPT are coming out to see how it deviates from this answer and the other ones. I mean,
He's running social experiments. That's with GPT. That's
Yeah.
amazing. So when oftentimes when I'm faced with kind of this disruptive change and uncertainty, I turn to like scenario planning or scenario modeling. So let's wind the clock forward 12 months. We're sitting on this same panel. How has this conversation advanced? And what did we predict and get right? And what did we predict and get wrong? I'm very curious about kind of your ability to populate knowledge graphs with GPT and the advancements that might lead to. Did that create kind of a positive force forward? I wonder what other kind of things, signposts we can imagine over the coming 3 to 6 months that would say, yeah, this is headed in a very interesting direction. Do you have any thoughts on that?
you look at me.
Actually, I've been doing experiments with knowledge extraction using not Chat GPT, but using GPT, and it's pretty good. I mean, you can get some stuff. You can get some really good triples out of it, and if you split the problem in just the right place, you can get some very good results out of it. And the question from there is, well, how do you really evaluate it effectively? Because like if you want to figure out if it's doing text generation from triples, it's like, well, then you have to read everything to see if it's actually decent, and vice versa. How do you know that any data set actually has all the triples that can be said in a sentence? What's your criteria for like what is a good extraction for it? Because it's at that point now where it's like, this could be up for debate depending whether or not this is actually like really good or just okay.
So we have about 7.5 minutes left. I don't know whether there's any burning questions from the audience. Ooh, there's one. Oh, Shani.
It's a question. I really liked Jan's synthetic data generation using ChatGPT. As a person who has used Cynthia, I find ChatGPT to be much, much easier when it comes to generating synthetic data. But at the same time, there have been stories of software engineers putting in proprietary code into ChatGPT for checking errors, for optimizing code, for example. Now, we haven't heard anything with respect to physicians putting, patient records to, give a diagnosis or something like that. But given, this is the healthcare and life sciences and we are talking about knowledge graphs, I was wondering and you also talked about guardrails, how you didn't like guardrails, but I think this is
I
one.
did not like who?
Guardrails.
Oh, guardrails.
Yeah.
Guardrails, yeah.
But I was wondering because there's so much protected data in patient information. Is if there's something we can do with knowledge graphs, maybe hey, this is a protected attribute, so we probably shouldn't feed this into the model. And this is like kind of a brain dead solution I'm saying, but there could be some other more complex solutions that we can think of that uses knowledge graphs to kind of filter out or sanitize data that goes into the large language models. So I want to hear the thoughts of not just you, from the entire panel about this, how we can utilize knowledge graphs to sanitize the data that's coming into large language models, not just to populate the data, populate knowledge graphs using the data from large language models.
Well, I'm very interested in event prediction because we're making entity event knowledge graphs for various industries. We have one for aircraft, right? We have maintenance records, many different types. And for me, always the most important, but most interesting question, what is the next thing that's going to happen, right? I mean, that's the only thing interesting for us human beings, right? What's going to happen next? And I can see that we take what you just said, the patient data, right, and feed that into your own model of patient data. I think it's amazing things could happen if you did that.
Exactly. I think when you dive into how RLHF works, reinforcement learning with human feedback, it's basically just here's a prompt, GPT gives you a set of answers, and the human being picks the best one, right? Now imagine we take all of these medical records, right? We take the medical history of the patient, we take the the treatment history. That's your prompt, right? And then GPT is going to give you a set of answers, and you pick the one that matches the reality, right? So that's one way of using, reinforcement learning to actually make these models work for us. So if you grab that information from into the knowledge graph, you have to separate it into what's the prompt, what's the right answer, right? And by the way, you can do the same thing with research papers, right? Every research paper has a hypothesis and then the conclusions, right? So we can actually use that to automate the knowledge creation, knowledge generation, or retraining these models so that they actually give us something that a scientist would be okay with.
So is that one of the killer use cases from the 11 learnings from our keynote this morning?
Yeah, well, I don't think we want it writing our papers for us.
Do we need to write papers? Is my next question,
Oh, well,
right? It's like all science is now being transacted into knowledge models, language models.
Yeah, I can't hypothesis on that one. Anybody?
Well, I'm going to say that the one part of science that any language model cannot do, and is probably still best done through the process of language, is asking ourselves and the rest of the world the question, what if I'm wrong? That's the foundational question of science. What if I'm wrong? You come up with a guess and then you get a result, but what if this is wrong? What if I did something wrong to get that answer? We do that over and over again until we eliminate all those possibilities. And that's a very open-ended question. And because it's so open-ended and because it's so fact-driven and knowledge-driven, it's not really something that language models can handle at this point. And it's not really something that there have been a lot of efforts around trying to represent the research process or research workflows in knowledge graphs, but the actual process of thinking it through is not something that will happen except linguistically until we can figure out how to, what's that? Is there a magic thing that we're doing that can be distilled to 5 predicates? But probably not.
Okay, so 3 minutes left. If somebody on the panel wanted to give some advice to the knowledge graph community on places to focus, is it what Jamie just said? Is it something else? Who wants to speak up?
I would recommend play as much as you can, because we're just all beginning to learn, right? We're all scratching the surface, and I mean, I did that work with the wine ontology only to learn about how to do it, right?
I love it.
And I did it to so many. I made so many mistakes, but you learn so much along the way when you do it. So just play.
Yeah.
That's it. The
I'm
only
gonna
thing.
say, same thing. Just try out prompt engineering. That's it's a whole thing, and it's not just about jailbreaking the models. It's about actually figuring out how to get it to do useful work using content that you provide it, and it is surprisingly effective.
Yeah, I think experimenting with use cases and try to see where you can start to get adoption. I think breaking down the personas and how understanding how humans are going to interact with this technology is a really curious thing for me as well. And I think some of the work that was presented earlier, how do we put these tools in the hands of these different personas who can then take advantage of them?
So I want to pick up on a conversation that Lena and I must have had about a month ago. And it was, the effectiveness of ChatGPT is based on it basically swallowing the internet and then having schema.org use that to structure it. And I think one of the things that we're concerned about is what is that going to look like for life science, because there's going to be so many places where it's just not well covered at all. It's just not on the web. It's either in people's heads or it's, buried in, box folders somewhere at, Pharma XYZ. And so, especially for things, like just it came up over lunch, things like the negative results, which you really want to have in there. So there was a proposal potentially to build one together as a community as part of a Pistoia project. And so is that something that seems like a good idea? Does that make sense to the community? Something we might want to come out of just recommending, do we build a large language model that's more focused in the life science space, do this as a pre-competitive thing, and see if we can get some funding for it?
I'll build on that idea and kind of bring back the post you sent me yesterday. So yesterday, Tom was doing homework for this panel, and
on the train.
he sent me a snapshot. He asked GPT, so what are the implications? How can we use knowledge graphs to improve large language models? And he came up with like a series of interesting things to do with knowledge graphs. So my proposal is like, let's talk about it as a community. Let's see what we can do about creating part of that white paper that we can then use to create those guardrails, and doing it through the Pistoia, and kind of actually start to implement this biopharma GPT that we can all trust and use and improve as we go. Just like Wikipedia, right? Nobody trusted Wikipedia at the beginning. People were like, "What do you mean you're taking internet you're taking knowledge from the internet?" But nowadays, it's been proven it's more accurate than Encyclopedia Britannica. So, Wikipedia won. Just like I think if we build this biopharma GPT model, we may be able to give ourselves a real accelerator.
So has anyone played with Dolly?
Dolly,
Yeah, I have. No, Dolly. The Databricks has their own. Because every enterprise I talk to is worried about one thing, and that is, if I train it on my data and I give it my data, then it's going to leak. There's this Samsung case, right, where the internal document leaked out. So everyone wants to have their own on-prem
Ring fence.
Yeah, around it. And so we've done some training on our own documents, but then you always get the mix of what they did and then what you added, right? You still can't trust the answers. So, but the answer is that's why it's going to be a little bit slower, because big enterprises will be afraid to I wouldn't give all your AstraZeneca data to ChatGPT yet.
Only if I really wanted to leave the company quickly.
Well, Samsung's outlawed because of that.
Yeah.
But I mean,
What is the path then? What is the path to try to get that hybrid model? And I know folks are trying to figure that out. That's a very active area of development.
I think one place that we really have to look is semantic search engines enhanced for ChatGPT, where you make a knowledge graph with your documents, split up in chapters, maybe even paragraphs, right? You have your regular taxonomies to get all the elements, all the entities, right, that you have out of the text. You do your regular semantic search, and then you ask ChatGPT to think about it, to read it, to give an answer, to summarize it, to find causal connections in there. It's that's one way where you can do it now if you can't build yet your own, because it took $100 million, right, to build a GPT-2.
All right. Well, so maybe that's one of the charges: semantic search to enhance LLMs, and maybe LLMs to
Enhance the search.
search.
Yeah.
And with that, we're essentially out of time. And thank you to the tech people, because they didn't know that we were going till 6 o'clock, so they graciously stayed. So thanks very much. Follow-up
you.
questions are most welcome. Thank you to the panelists. And I'm on board for this, yeah. But actually the negative results too. Yeah.